have a habit of we ask people to introduce themselves, but I'll tell the background, right? So Elena is obviously at a tough school of medicine, or this is actually the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy, which we should be actually for the Food Group, right? and I met her through Darius, who is the dean of the school, and Darius and us are working together on some of the food-related stuff. And that was kind of we connected up, and at that time we were hoping to get her over to tell us a little bit what's happening at the Fritz One School. So with the further ado, I'll let yourself to tell us a little bit about your background and how you arrived to this problem. Okay?
Absolutely. So, yes, I am Elena Naumova. I am from Russia, from Siberia. That's where my very strong accent is coming from.
It's a Siberian.
It's a Siberian accent, unremovable. And yes, I'm here for almost 25 years, and I'm not planning to delete my accent. So that's there. I am a mathematician by training. I started from theoretical mathematics, moved to topology, moved to time series analysis, and stayed with time series analysis and statistical application for almost all my time. But about 15 years ago, we received a grant proposal. We received a grant from NIH on biosurveillance at that time. So it's a biodefense grant focusing on the very dangerous pathogens of group A, B, and C. And we received that grant, and we're working on the trying to model the T-cell response to influenza. Of course, 90% of that work was experimental work, and it all was related to how to recruit patients, how to take blood. At that time, it was a huge amount of blood to receive the first measurements of T-cell receptor repertoire, and after that, to analyze and to model the responses. So, in this talk, I will be telling you a little bit of a story how people think about aging of our immune system, how we can use influenza as a clock to measure how old we are, and how we use mathematics in order to describe it. And I will try to walk you through some elements of the fractal structures in general and see how those pieces can relate. And at the end, I wish that we can probably briefly talk about how I see the connections between the nutrition, T-cell receptor repertoire, immunosenescence, and microbiome, all taken together. Okay? So there are a few very big generic questions. Is what is immunosenescence? And it's basically how our immune system ages. But how to measure immunosenescence, it's even more daring question than just to define it. Because if we can measure our age chronologically, but even more interesting to measure our age biologically, and we can assume that everything ages at different speed, like our knees and our head and our brain, everything can age with a different progression. An immune system.
Not true, right?
I believe in it. You know, I believe that I will be in heart always 17, so I stick with this notion. So, but then the question would be how to, not only how to measure how fast we age, but what kind of tools we have in order to do these measurements in a more or less reliable manner. And how to use and why to use fractals. This is really, core issue, and look like this is type of a system have enough flexibility and rigidity in order to describe different elements. And how the experimentation and simulations can come together to help us out. And of course, just in order to remind you how the fractals might look like, there are pictures of fractals. So I would like to think about that we can describe immunosenescence from multiple perspectives. Of course, it's from the modeling level, from experimental and simulation studies, and from theoretical assumptions. Okay? So from a molecular point of view, we can think about that our response to influenza forms specific memory in immune system. And that memory have a very interesting dynamic properties. And we are postulating that by using the exposure to flu, which happens on a regular basis, we can start to learn how to use the exposure and our responses as a biological clocks. So those who are under the weather today, like Julia, you can think about that. You can think about that every single year we have a chance to be exposed to different viruses, and some of the viruses, they come like a clock. That's what defines seasonality. And this type of exposure on a regular basis can basically work as a regular stimulator. So our immune system have a tendency to contract and to expand with respect to stimulus. By contracting and expanding, it's basically create a biological clocks. So that's our theoretical molecular level basis. And we can see that some support on that level come both from experimental and from simulation studies. And we also have an idea that we don't really see it only plainly on experimental response using only data, but we see also work on theoretical settings, including Albersville, that might probably support our notion of what we see in the data set. So as I mentioned to you, the immune system have a tendency to start with generation. It's when children were very young and the thymus is still working. So there is a period of time when we generate our immune response. We can assume that all the kids were born with naive system, and that system start to get exposure and become more and more mature. Somewhere in our 20s, 30s, we reach the level of maturity of immune system. It means the thymus is no longer provide you new cells. Whatever you develop and whatever exposure you have, you capitalize on this exposure. And then after maturity, there is a period of immunosenescence. That would be like progression of immunological age. So I also mentioned to you that every single exposure to any viruses, flu specifically, will have this expansion-contraction cycle. So every single season, we can think about the system expand, assume it will have an exposure, and then contract when there is no need for these antibodies to respond anymore. So it's basically a sequence of the expand, contract cycles. So after that is done, you can also think about, there are different scenarios for people to age. You can start really very well at the healthy level, we can say, and then it's a quite fast decline in terms of frailty. Okay? You also can assume that somebody can live really very strong, long, productive life, and then at some point have really very sharp reductions in health and quality. So frailty will go down pretty quickly. And there are other scenarios which allow you to have different stages in life. So this is just basically that graph demonstrates you different type of scenarios, how different people might age. And it means we might have different level of longevity, but also different level of quality with these specific responses. So there are different scenarios for us to think about. And it means that also how we respond to this expansion-contraction cycle can be different at different ages. So children will, probably contract really very quickly and expand slowly. Middle age might be contracting infections in regular phases, but if immune system is really very strong, they might not experience symptomatology. And the third one, the older people, when they will react in the new unusual viruses, those unusual viruses which do not sit in the immune system can be the sources of very hard responses. Okay, so that's basically in every single stage. Even our contraction and expansion cycles can vary by age.
What is like a mean period of these contraction expansions?
So typically, it's necessary to wait, and that can, the first reactions to the flu can be in hours, because that's why, somebody sneezes in a bus, and then you come home in the evening, and you will say, oh, something really very strange happening. So the virus, especially flu virus, have a really very high contingency level. So it means this type of reactions could be really very fast. However, the T cells will not come immediately. Whatever reactions you feel, it's actually reactions on a different type of a level. So as soon the T cells will kick in to inactivate and remove the virus itself, it will take a while. And that a while could be measured by days. But the question is how much and how fast the system will start to contract. That will take months. Okay, so it's like a spike, and then there will be decay with a different degree of that decay. So we think about, we can think about the flu is, for reason, is seasonal. Okay, so it's very likely that maybe the response to that specific pathogen will last only a few months. However, they have a special matrix peptide, which is basically unified all the responses to flu. And therefore, next time we're exposed to flu, there is some leftover from the previous responses. Okay? So it's sort of like that immune memory kicks in all the different elements as well. Okay? So, if we will look at the T cell repertoire structurally, this is basically results from crystallology, and it's a structure of T cell receptor repertoire. We basically, for us, for a mathematician, it's not really very important maybe to know exactly how the structure will look like, but the most important one to know what would be the type of a different genetic material which will form this response to flu. So if we will think about what does that response to flu look like, it means for every single exposure, we will have a sequence of different type of a genetic material, and we will call them clonotype. Okay, each clonotype can appear only once, twice, or many times. Okay, so it's not only necessary to know what exactly clonotypes will show up in the system, but also how frequently that clonotypes will appear. So it's a frequency of the clonotype or how many clonotypes, and the frequency of the clonotypes in itself. Okay, so that's what we basically see. And that is so typical for any world when you basically do a counting system. Something will be more dominating, something will be less dominating. And the relationship between less dominating and the more dominating, that's what basically the most interesting part of the system itself. So we created the naming, we call it nomenclature system, which allowed us to quantify and name every single clonotype. They have not only the naming structure, they have hierarchy also incorporated. So if you will think about the food, you will have an item and you will have a system of items to whom that item might belong. It means that you have not only the list of the clonotypes, but the hierarchy of the clonotypes expressed in some way. Okay? So we have a counting system as well, and now we will say, okay, if we have names and we have a frequency, how often they appear in our specific response, how we can define, how we can quantify, how we can describe, and how we can analyze. So now we have a place where a mathematician can play around.
So just to make sure, the clonotype is really just a differently folded protein, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's only what is important that they have unique genetic material.
Perfect, and that's definitely because you have the
Yeah.
genetic marker of the mutation that occurs.
Exactly. But they are not random,
No, sure.
and that is really very important. And they form that hierarchy, which is again another conversation to have. So what we can do, we can arrange all the clonotypes with respect to their frequency. And if we will do it, like in any ecological settings, we will always find that there are some clonotypes which appear only rarely, only once or twice. This is what we will call low-rank clonotypes or low-frequency clonotypes. We also have some of them which will appear really very frequently. It's a dominant structure. So we will have high-frequency clonotypes, and it will be clonotypes which will be in the middle. So that is a typical situation for almost any counting systems overall. Okay? What would be the next step? Again, really very easy. Let's count them properly, assign the rank to a frequency. So if it is rarely appears clonotype only once, this is where they are, and in terms of frequency. So it's basically conversion, it's a dimensionality reduction. Okay? In the second representation, we lose the information about the name of a clonotype, but we retain information about how frequently this clonotype appears in the system. Okay? Are you with me?
Yeah. I had kind of a mathy question. So each of these clonotypes is some rearrangement of the
Genetic
blocks
material.
that are making that receptor.
Mhm.
Now, if I was going to make just a random rearrangement of those clonotypes, wouldn't the distribution of what would the distribution of the clonotypes look like? Would this be the distribution that you get?
It depends
Or-
on the age. It depends on the maturity.
Oh,
Okay, and that's exactly where I'm going to.
okay.
So, for example, for a naive system, I can assume that almost all of the clonotype will appear only randomly and only in a very low frequency. So that's at least our assumptions, and it's our understanding how the immune system responds. And as soon that specific clonotype become really very important with respect to functionality, it responds very well. Then the system will kick in and it will proliferate much faster, and because of it become beneficial for the system. Okay?
Right.
So therefore, frequency, number of clonotypes in general, it's some kind of functional characteristics of how useful this clonotype for responses. And if it is useful throughout the life, it will probably sustain. And if it's not so useful, it will appear and reappear depending on specific situation. Okay? And that's exactly where I'm going. I'm trying to make a statement about that the shape of this distribution might change with age, with experience, and with exposure. Okay? So now we know how it's related. It's really very simple if we will do log transformation of the both sides. If it's a proper relationship between two sides, it can be assumed that maybe if it's a golden ratio, and that's from here I start to go into the fractal structure. So I will assume there are a couple of inspirations. First of all, how the spiral behave. Very simple spiral will have exactly the property of the golden ratio. Another inspiration come from the fractal trees, and another inspiration coming from the art, Mandelbrot, which is basically put all the pieces together. So if I will put all three ideas together, this is what I will have as a description of the clonotype. This is a clonotype which appears only once. This is twice. This is 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and so on. Okay? It's a conversion of the data. It's a compression of the data. And if you want to uncompress this data, I can uncompress them using symmetrical representation. So it means those who are twice are twice, those who are 3 times will be now 3 times. And it will keep going and keep going and keep going. So all of this panel can contain every single clonotype individually. Okay? So you with me. Perfect. And I can replace it really very easily with idea as cascade fractals. And in the cascade fractals, I can actually start to check how frequently I see departure from the ideal possible scenario. So I can expect that maybe for children, that first fractions will expand. It will be bigger than the rest, than the proportions will allow. And if, for example, I will take on the elderly fractions, maybe these fractions will contract. And if it's contract, maybe some other will expand. So I can actually think about the dynamics. It would be some kind of departure from ideal system of fractal relationship. Okay? Very good. I also designed a system, basically a simulation suite, which will allow us to check is it true or not, is it how frequently we can come to this type of fractal assumptions using the data which we have. So we created a system which allowed us to propagate, expand, and contract, doing basically computational simulation study. And based on the simulation study, we can recreate the paths, how through the different number of cycles, how we can restore the distribution, and we eventually can come up with the shape of a distribution we see in people with mature immune system. Are you with me? So far. I hope I didn't lose you.
Why do you need a fractal for that? Why can't you just simply look at the statistics? So what is the fractal you see that you will get from the statistics?
What fractals I will not get? Oh, I'm using fractal to choose, to simplify a way how to set up the propagation and elimination stage. That's where the fractals help me to do. Like, I can come up with the parameters from a data and fetch the data from the existing material. I am using fractals in order to come up with the probabilities at different stages. That's where it becomes, it's optimizing the system instead of doing all the possible selections and permutations. And that's actually, I think that allowed me to do a little bit better with the theory, what is behind, rather than to do it by permutation steps. Okay? So if I will be thinking about this fractal structure, I can basically define it as an individual. I can start to build a population. So now I have a population of people with different fractal properties. So now it is a self-contained system. I can describe one individual based on their parameters, but I also start to describe communities. And I can start to describe communities in respect to their age and how they will change. So it's allowed me to see the differences between time 1 and time 2. So not only it is interesting to know how it's changed over time, I'm trying to figure out also how the fractals and stability works together. So from the start we were talking about a clonotype which will appear all the time. It means it's useful, it's functional, and it means it will be stable throughout the life and long-term progression. In order to test this hypothesis, I need to have data in longitudinal manner. So I need to have patients or participants who will participate on the longitudinal structure. So I will be able to measure their progression with repertoire along the way. And we know that there are periods of time when we have an influenza in place. It means contractions and expansions is expected. We also know there are some period of time people will go for vaccinations, and it is analog of controlled exposure, but in a definitely controlled environment. So we can actually see if through the longitudinal analysis how these contractions and expansions will start. So using the same idea, we can start to work how this individual repertoire measured at different time can be represented as either pooled repertoire throughout all the observations, or how we can measure stability. So in the simplest possible way, it's basically a Pascal triangle. You just need to look through the different combinations in a temporal repetition. And if we will go through this logic, initially our null hypothesis could be that regardless how frequently we will see this clonotype, very probably distribution would be either uniform or normally distributed, whatever our assumption might happen. But in reality, what we observe that the frequency relates to stability, which would be a property of fractal as well. So we will go back to the basic theoretical assumptions. That's what we would expect from a fractal structure, when it's not entirely normal, but there is a selection process which will drive selection of preferable clonotypes. Okay? So, and if this is true, we can actually check it with experimental conditions. We took data from a high throughput sequences. We see the distribution for multiple donors. This is a standard behavior which we will observe. You can see this type of a distribution over and over and over again. But we also can start to measure stability. And that stability will tell us that it's mimicking behavior of the rank frequency. So we see a strong connections between stability preferences for selecting specific clonotype and its frequencies. Okay. So we repeat it for children, we repeat it for middle age, we repeat it for elderly people. What we observe is the following. There are clear relationship between the curvature of the fractal repertoire and age. So the younger the child would be, the more naive system might be. So the more uniform distribution you would expect from a start. As soon the maturity will happen, distribution become more and more diverse, more and more selective. Okay? So it means during that transitions and transformation, those who were stable and very well functioning retain through the time. Those who were less functionality basically disappear over time. And it's explained why immunosenescence becomes such an important point, because if a person have a past experience with a specific type of exposure, and suddenly it was a new exposure, that new exposure is more devastating than the repeat exposure a person had in the past. It's actually really very strong argument now for vaccination. So now you have a behavior. Also, you can actually check very carefully how stability looks like. Stability means repetition of the same phenotype along the time on a longitudinal spectrum. And what we see that for adult people who have a mature repertoire, they have the best stability expressed. But for those who are elderly and for children, actually stability starts to disappear. For children, it's just because of they don't have that system developed yet. And for elderly, because of they start to lose the capacity to respond to new type of exposure. Okay?
So, one question. So your stability is comparable to a measure of entropy of the time series of the phenotypes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. Exactly. So, perfect. So you can actually see right now, if I will take a look at evolution, on the complexity, we can see that with age, the relationship between stability and frequency, fractality or complexity, whatever we will definition can come up with, but the notion of entropy is the best one.
So I did a paper on network entropy, it's another thing, but where we were looking into time series basically, and we observed exactly the same thing. Exactly the same. Completely different things, but that's
and I think that I believe it is a universal property. Like in this situation, it happens to be T-cell receptor repertoire to flu. But I think that, talking about how many single elements are so much interrelated to each other, I actually believe that if we will be doing similar idea for microbiome, we will see similar behavior. Okay. Yes, it would be a period of time when very simple system, not many connections, not many logical, establishment is made, and then the system reached maturity and start to decline.
So what about successful aging?
Oh.
You're already thinking about it.
So you see, if I will be just thinking about successful aging, the point would be to keep this blue line to the green line as close as possible. The point would be to keep this blue line to this green line as close as possible.
Right.
It means any type of actions, good nutrition, activity, proper medications. It's testable, because of actually each of these parameters can be defined really very easily. It's the curvature of the anchored regression. So it could be estimated really very well, it can be explained very well, and it can be measured.
But also, just in terms of observation, for example, if you have a cohort of people that are between 60s and 70 years old, not all these people in the future will reach the 90 years old, 100. And then you have successfully aged people, like the centenarians or people like that. Have you ever observed anything? Like, would we expect that the entropy is like complexity of what you're observing is phenotypically different from people at the pool of 70 years old or something like that?
I believe so. I believe that would be
and so that would be a way to redefine the age of these people.
Exactly,
right?
and that is this is exactly the usefulness in terms of the moving, in terms of assessing the age and what it means successful aging. It's almost like you can think about maybe not freezing somebody in a specific age, but keep it monotonic and keep it healthy. So if I will go back to that picture really very quickly, to me successful aging from that specific regard, that would be successful aging. Keeping as healthy as long. And if it's a crash, it's crashed really very fast. But as long as possible, so that being in a fragile state or a frail state would be minimized. Okay, so now moving forward, we also did another type of analysis to make sure that we understand how the changes really can happen in simulated environment. So we basically use a Markov chain modeling, a Markov state modeling, and we put the system in understanding how it can be measured overall. And in the simplest possible way, we can start with a pool of naive cells. And you allow them basically to either stay, means present for given conditions, or disappear from a system. That's basically what we call stability. We want to see what the fractions of cells will go into the steady state and the fractions of cells which will disappear from our usage. Okay, are you with me? So, but of course this is very naive. You know, there is no biological system which will just disappear and never reappear. And experimental conditions, it's not plausible at all. So how to make this system as close as possible to real conditions? Now, first of all, we need to consider that there is a potential return. So if they disappear for a while, but they come back later on. Plus, in any experimental conditions, you know, we all the time have a pool of new cells which we'll be able to recruit because of our technology is improving as well, because if we are not able to measure all the clonotype in the blood simultaneously at once. So, okay, it's much better, but it's still not the full solution. We need to make it a bit more complex. So it's not only return and replenish the system, but it's also allowed us to do the whole entire spiel with all available data. So that means we have a loss from circulations, we have a soft loss, we have a hard loss. So this is basically a model which allowed us to see true stability. Okay? Are you with me?
I'm reading.
Okay, so it's basically Markov chain. Okay, it is ability to sustain, to be in a loop and stay, so this clonotype is all the time present. Or there is a situation where if it is lost in circulation, lost forever, or there is a pool of clonotype which come back. Okay, so that's basically a traditional way to measure stability in a classical possible way. Okay, so we designed the system, and in this system we basically allowed also, it's a simulated environment. We're able to check and to test and retest which clonotype to stay and which clonotype disappear, like in any agent-based modeling. Okay. At the end of this simulation, we actually have derived a classical person who are aging less or more successfully. So, like if we will take somebody who have still like in the 65, 70s, but still have really very strong immune response, this basically the results of that simulations and the results which we will see in the individual. It means there is a steady pool of clonotype. We are all the time present in the system. It's about 20% of it. Okay? About 80%, 90%, they are hiding. They go into the sleep mode and come back when it's needed. Okay? So if we will think about different type of therapies, different type of opportunity, personalized treatment, personalized medications, the task would be to identify for each individual person, what is this unique 10% pool, which is constantly in circulation. Okay? Maybe it's necessary to boost in order to have a healthy aging. That will be one of the solutions. Maybe we need to make sure that that proportion of really very steady pool supplemented with renewed and exchange pool can have a different proportion, depends on the different conditions. Okay? So that's a backbone. And I would be really very curious to know what could affect that fancy schmancy pool of really very steady clonotypes. Is it vary by genetic profile? Can be improved or increased by whatever we claim as a healthy aging in general.
What about diet?
What about diet? Yeah.
I mean, there is this theory about inflammaging. So first of all, the fact that we are aging according to a constant low state of inflammation, right? And on the other hand, there is also the fact that some of the people that are eating in a specific way, like Mediterranean people, they're basically training their immune system with a constant low level of inflammation that is coming from the diet in a certain way, because there is this hormetic principle that you are exposed to chemical compounds that are basically triggering your immune system. So that would be something to test, I guess.
Exactly, because of people who are on a different diet quite often respond to infections as well differently.
Okay.
And there are some publications which can demonstrate that too. So like I'm only like arguing that maybe we can use some traditional system to use it as a testing ground in terms of the effect of this diet, let's say on age, but maybe even more directly on response to flu.
Yes.
I see the
I'm
question.
trying to understand how, because if there would be a connection, it might be indirect. But so these clonotypes are used by the T cells for the identifying pathogens, basically, right? So they will be only used if there is a virus or a bacterium that the immune system will need to fight, right?
But they're all the time in our pool. You know, this is what allowed us to go through the winter season, not to be completely crushed. They are in a pool of our system.
Yes. But I mean, say, for example, if you get some inflammation from food and it is not due to poisoning because of some organisms in the food, but rather through some indirect chemical effect of the food, then I'm not sure how it will affect the composition of the clonotypes, which are just dealing with organisms, with like bacteria and viruses.
There are a couple of groups right now who are working on putting together T-cell receptor repertoire and microbiome. Okay?
Right.
So they're looking how the T-cell receptor and the microbiome can change. So far I know a couple of them. And then practically because it's expensive, because it's really very tedious, it's very hard to run it. It's usually cross-sectional studies. And in the cross-sectional studies, the idea is to link the diversity of a T-cell and the diversity in microbiome, okay? But it seems to me that will not allow us to see it in dynamics or even mentioning how to respond to dynamics. It looked like the most interesting piece would be, let's say start from really very simple situation. Before exposure to flu, after exposure to flu. You know, right now so many papers trying to make an argument that our immune response right now in the guts. And whatever you have in the microbiome, it helps boost a specific part of the immune response. So possible. What if we also can think about more prospectively in the long run, especially if we can even do the whole entire life exposure, what it means graceful aging with respect to flu responses and maintaining the microbiome on the same way simultaneously. So there are papers which demonstrate that the microbiome pool and diversity shrink with age. Okay? There are so many evidence that after antibiotic treatment, it's wiped out and you have the system probably like setting up almost intact. There are also publications which demonstrate that after chemotherapy, the immune responses to infections is wiped out, but microbiome is wiped out as well. So there are a number of biological systems and scenarios where all of these hypotheses can be at least on the first round test. And I love the idea of thinking about that maybe different diets will somehow to predispose the selections of different clonotypes in the system itself.
Another interesting setting is people with chronic parasitic infections. I know that in Brazil people study those people because they help them age in a better way too, because they maintain the level of inflammation in the body.
Yep.
And it helps them age.
No,
Yeah.
all of that, like unique groups of people who are manage to maintain good immune responses but still having chronic infections, it's sort of like a complete, very, very unique super populations which you need to be studied really very carefully. And I would put them sort of like on the edges of the universe for studying as an extreme, because they might give a really very good idea for explanation how the different systems are connected.
I'm just waiting for more questions. I have a number of questions, but we'll wait until the end, okay?
Okay?
No, I will have a chance to chat with you at the end, so if there's any questions.
I also have another question. Then about the flu shots, right? That people take flu shots every year.
I am one of them.
So that should
For
help.
the last 15 years, just only because of the studies itself. Yes.
So that should help people age better, because you keep your clonotypes always there, right?
Yep. Actually, it was really very interesting because we didn't know exactly how everything works. Our first paper was published on blood of 3 donors, 3 only. And because of it was extremely expensive. Every single experiment cost thousands of dollars. Of course, in the last 15 years, it became cheaper on exponential level. But the first experiments were quite tedious and difficult to do. So we have one donor who was actually our scientist who worked with flu all the time. That was his bread and butter from the start. His repertoire was absolutely beautifully, fractally ideal. And like you can actually see the perfect diversity, the perfect stability. And one of the explanations we come up with, knowing practically nothing yet about the system, it's just because of he had a regular exposure to flu. He would said like, I never sick with flu. Of course you never sick with flu. Your response is already created beautifully. So what we see also with people who take the regular flu shots, we started with just only single shot. And we see that the modification of the distribution, it's getting smoother, it's getting like more wonderfully aligned with all the parameters, getting closer and closer to that wonderful golden spiral. Okay, and then if it's a multiple exposure, we see this type of connections much better off. People who went through flu with a very rough and very difficult consequences, like for example pneumonia, or they were not really very strong in health before the test itself. Their distribution again much more edgy, more sharp. There are fractions of this very well positioning clonotypes that very, very high spike is really very high, disproportionately high. And the tail is much, much longer too. So by aging, by seeing how that distribution looks, we might think about that it is something that really happens again in terms of the frequency of controlled exposure. So when I put that picture before, and Julie asked a question about the healthy aging, like thinking about healthy aging. This is not a stable curve. Now you can think that about that maybe in our life, after a very rough period of time with this big stress, with big exposure, we age ourselves. We age ourselves. But then it's a recovery, and the distribution getting smoother, and maybe we're getting younger again. So like I can come up with like crazy, fantastic ideas about this sense. But it's true, taking the distribution at different period of time, we can see that contractions expansion. And that contraction expansion, the speed how it contract, the speed how it expand, what is new came out and what is old is taken, probably defined that relationship overall.
I was curious, how well established is the fact that there is a power law distribution on the frequency of these different genotypes?
I think that when we published this paper first, it was 1996. It was just like strange because of that was a mystery. Because of assumption was that our response is only monoclonal. There are like only 2 clones which will be responsible for that. And we published the paper and said, no, it's polyclonal. It's not a joke. And we start to see more and more papers start to come up demonstrating the same behavior. So now, like for example, group in Stanford, group in Rochester, there are multiple research groups, even the whole entire association about the T-cell receptor repertoire demonstrate that relationship over and over and over again. However, very early papers all have different modifications in terms of how they measure responses. You need to stimulate cells, and by stimulating you create sort of like new, unique conditions. Now with a high throughput and with the standard techniques, which now become really a staple, then you can start to see that the behavior is practically established.
And your rate equation model is not designed to reproduce a power law, right? That's not your goal.
No.
Because we normally use rate equations to explain the emergence of the power laws. Is there a mechanism that explains why you have that? Are there more rate equation models to explain that behavior?
I started to model it from assuming that there is sort of like this, birth-death process, in the classical form. And I start to play with the probabilities. in terms of, you know, what kind of ratio of probabilities I need to have.
Yeah.
And there is sometimes, not sometimes, it's almost always there is a pairing of propagation and contractions probabilities, like birth and death probabilities, which will lead you to a foul logic.
You would have to have some degree of preferential attachment to have that. So
Yeah.
like, and then it should actually be probably, when you see it across so many systems, it's not the question of choosing the parameters. The model has to burst out that behavior. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking for a traditional model to get it for, that's probably, it has to be something more robust than that. But there's lots of rate equations that can generate that power law. So that's
Yeah.
what we do in network science.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't know whether people have understood that mechanism.
I am not sure that we understand it well. It will be really very good for us maybe to go and, you know, come up with a couple of explanations and see which explanation would be most realistic. And who knows, maybe arrival to different, maybe in different settings, different laws kick in.
Should not be too difficult probably to find that.
Mm-hmm.
Given the extensive data that you already have there. So. Cool. Any other questions? All right, I do have a final question. So I mean, obviously you are in the nutrition school, but this is your main research, right? So you're not
No,
doing,
it's my hobby.
not by, this is your hobby, I see. So can
It's
you
my
just tell
love
us
and
one or
passion.
two sentences about what you do in the food space?
No, actually, you know, in the food space, I'm mostly monitoring infectious outbreak.
I see, okay.
On very large settings, like it will be mostly foodborne outbreak,
I see, so
waterborne
the
outbreak.
spread of kind of a foodborne outbreak,
Yeah.
I see, okay.
Yeah.
That's-
So it's still linked to whatever I'm doing
Sure.
here, but it's mostly like back to explaining the seasonal patterns. I'm
Mhm.
very much interested in behavioral seasonal behavior, and everything which is related to nutrition have a seasonality in it. It's like
Yes.
seasonal availability of the food, seasonal increase and decrease in malnutrition in developing countries. It's a seasonal modifications in terms of how we gain the weight and how we lose the
Mhm.
weight. So like everything which is related to seasonality, it's basically what I
So
do.
when do we gain the weight?
We gain the weight in the winter time. We start right now. The
I
most
see.
dangerous month for us is December.
December.
Because of the starting
Lots
of
of holidays, lots of food, not much movement, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a combination of two, which is basically typically for everybody.
Okay, so no food at the Christmas party.
That's hard. And you see, we make the first kick in with a Thanksgiving dinner, and we don't stop till the middle of January. And unfortunately, it's really very hard even in the middle of January because it's still really very cold, and we need to have a boost of energy, you know, to sustain the core temperature too.
I see, so the bear loses the weight and we gain it.
Bears start to lose the weight as soon the equinox, you know, so like it's really, I know I'm from Siberia.
And we're gaining it.
Yeah, so we basically need to see because of that, it's again, it's up to what level you maintain and then you start to have a depletion, and as soon as a depletion, you can survive depletion for a short period of time. You need sunshine and you need to have a spring. And funny enough, people say that seasonality did not really, like, you don't see it in a tropical area. You know, tropics, it's outside of a seasonal pattern. It's a seasonal pattern. It's just not the temperature regulate the seasonal pattern, but mostly precipitation. So the monsoon season will be controlling the behavior of the seasons overall.
All right, well then again, it's like so I don't know how much time you have, because if you have, we could. I mean, I don't know how much you're exposed to what we're doing in the food dome space.
Oh, I would love to know more what you're doing.
So I mean, who could be the good person to introduce you? I know you're sick, right? So, like, and maybe Italo. I mean, maybe we should kind of start the discussion with Italo.
And I was in your sessions as well, so I'm
Yes, you have the
familiar
big
with
picture.
what you described.
But I
in
think that
general.
the best thing, because Italo is kind of approaching it from the molecular biology perspective, the food dome thing. So would you have a little time to kind of discuss?
sure.
And I know you and I discussed about the grant as well, but we can do that after that.
Okay.
Okay? All right. So let's reconvene in the smaller settings. Okay?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.